Let's continue talking about the topic of employee classification. It's not necessarily super boring because it really has huge implications to your company, including with the IRS. And you want to make certain that you're on the appropriate side in your regulations when we talk about employee classification. So, inaccurate classifications of workers, heavy fines, and penalties. I worked one time in another college. They had 43 different temporary employees that the IRS ruled that you are not temporary, you are regular employees. There's no differentiation between you as a contractor, which is what they claimed they were, versus that of employees, and they had to hire them all. Okay, so the implication of that was when you have an employee, okay, your employee cost is not what you're paying them. That is part of what you're paying. Typically, you're going to pay 20% above the wages. Normally, I calculated 22.7% above that, not including insurance. Insurance was another 20%. So it just depends how they're classified. You, instead of paying, if let's say, for instance, you're paying somebody $50,000 a year, $50,000 a year, just plan on that being $60,000 at least total cost for your company, but realistically probably $65,000 for that $50,000 employee. And if that includes insurance, you're going to be paying $70,000 for that at least. So you're looking at the aspect of differences of 20 to 30%, sometimes 40% above the actual money of the wages you're paying. That's a big penalty and a big fine and the IRS waived the fines that were due, and the fines amounted to almost $200,000. So it depends where you're at, and be careful. This is big business. It is expensive. Don't get this wrong. Okay, so inaccurate classification, heavy fines, penalties, federal and state law both kick in. They damage your overall revenue receipts, and the National Labor Relations Act, the board itself comes in. You have to deal with Fair Labor Standards Act. Did you pay minimum wage? Did you pay overtime rates? If you're in California, did you pay overtime over 8 hours? You have to sit down and take Social Security Act payroll deductions. All that is sitting right there. Pay attention to your state labor codes. Workers' compensation. The purpose of workers' compensation isn't fun and entertainment to try to charge you a tax. What it does, it protects the employer. If an employee is injured on the job, it caps the overall compensation for what the employer has to pay for the actual injury. Now, that being said, this sounds awful, but the reality is that your little finger, okay, actually has a formal financial value in the workers' compensation laws in place. There's actually fees. So if you're working on something and you lose your little finger, there is a specific compensation amount limited there that tells you how much the employer owes you for the loss of your little finger in the job. That avoids you having to sue the employer. You don't have to worry about being compensated for being damaged and everything else. And you can always give the employer that little finger as a gesture if you want to. So pay attention to that part of it. But the aspect of it is that is an additional payment made above and beyond the wages. Make certain that you're paying attention to the coordination among the IRS, the Department of Labor, and all the different states that have this aspect of it. There's individual state initiatives, and sometimes if they find out through an investigation there's a willful misclassification subject, there's even more severe penalties. IRS has a whole settlement program to avoid penalty. You have to sit down there and make certain that you pay attention to this if you ever get involved in this classification issue. You need to work with your initial structure as to how you're having an employee. Make certain your payroll department knows what they're doing. Make certain that the classification part is an HR function in the process. There's a whole series of settlement companies. You have to pay attention to it. And there's lots of different aspects about the IRS rulings. And you have different aspects of it. And I recommend that you go through and pay attention to it. I had one time one of the colleges I had was out there and they had somebody that they were deliberately, the supervisor on the job was being, as far as I was concerned, a disingenuous agent of the college, and he was setting up a personal friend of his to become an employee. So I sat down, and after I listened to him and everything else, I went and I talked to the person that was pushing it. I says, I'm sorry, we have hired them as a contractor only. We didn't define the workplace. We didn't define the hours. And you gave him the phone number in violation of our board policy. I'm taking the phone away right now. And then I sent him to the IRS. And by the time it was all done, the IRS has 19 different rules. Our attorney determined, no, they are not an employee. They're a contractor. We terminated the contractor. We disciplined the supervisor. Quite frankly, should probably have terminated his employment. And so you have that aspect of it. And so pay attention to this aspect of it. People can play around with this whole thing, trying to turn friends into employees, and all of a sudden you're stuck on the hook because you weren't paying attention to what's going out there. So here is what the IRS, they have 3 overall general categories. Behavioral control. Does the company control or have the right control what the worker does and how the worker does the job? If you are telling the contractor, you will do it this way, you will do it this way, you will do it this way, how you do your job, that's a sign you have an employee. Our instruction given to the worker, okay, when to work, where to work, what tools to use. Did you issue a telephone number? Did you provide them with an office space? Did you have an expectation that they would start at the same time as all your other employees? Did you provide training by the company? What kind of behavior did you control? Secondly, what type of financial control are there? Are there different aspects of the worker's job controlled by the payer? Did you sit down and do this? How is the worker paid? Okay, whether the expenses are reimbursed. Who provides tools and supplies? That's the second category. So first, you have behavior. Now you have financial control. And then are there written contracts, different types of aspects of it? Do you have a pension plan that you're participating in? If you do, if there's a pension plan, you pretty much have bought yourself an employee instead of a contractor. Will the relationship continue? Is there an expectation by both parties that this contractor will continue? Is the work performed a key aspect of the business? Really, the definition of employee is the ABC test. It's trending in California, now in 12 other states. The employee default, pretty much in California, they prefer that you're sitting down and making them an employee versus something else. We even had it on the ballot, and the issue was the state legislature was going after Uber drivers, trying to turn them all into employees. And that was actually defeated by the voters of the state. But for the most part, you have a lot of states trying to get people to become employees, trying to sit down and have some type of longevity within the organization. So pay attention. This is now a national discussion in the process. Gig work. A lot of U.S. workers participate in gig work. 44%. Gig work is really the aspect of a side hustle, but a lot of times the classification is unclear pending different court rulings with a lot of different implications. Do you have 2 jobs, or are you just working as a contractor over here with a full-time job here? Do you have 3 different part-time jobs? I've had that before where somebody cobbled together their own career pathway and they worked at 3 different places. Is one of them treating you as an employee? Actually, one of them was, okay, and other work relationships. So it depends what it is. Work is temporary, sporadic, it differs. A lot of times we're developing much more non-traditional work relationships with people working from home and people working at work. So it depends what it is. Sometimes somebody working at home may think they have a really good deal, then all of a sudden they're ruled to be working from home as a contract employee and they lose their employment status, or they're hired only to work from home as a contractor and don't come in, we're not sending your hours and everything else. So you, to some extent, the old phrase, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Well, watch out. Somebody may take your cake away from you and they might eat your cake in the process. So think about the whole aspect as to what exactly you're doing. Here's a real positive thing. That positive thing can also turn into something that's negative and positive for somebody else. So the aspect of work, temporary, sporadic, it differs from a normal full-time employee. Pay attention to that because the world is shifting in the aspect of trying to come back into the workplace and so on. So we'll see what happens with that. Trainees. Sometimes they're worked from the Fair Labor Standards with the minimum wage and overtime while they're receiving formal vocational training. If you, in that situation, make certain you check with legal counsel on this issue, because that can also be another problem if you don't handle it right. Trainees can be exempt, but pay attention. You're better off including them. I always prefer to lean on the more conservative side on this issue, because you don't want to be caught with the aspect of a contractor sitting there all of a sudden evolving from being a contracted trainee into a full-time employee if you can avoid it. Pay attention to IRS guidelines. There's the 19 rules out there. I give you the classifications initially. Outside contractors can be very helpful, and really a lot of virtual organizations are popular, especially if you go study like for instance, Nike. Nike is a virtual corporation. They have fabulous design and fabulous marketing. All the manufacturing is a virtual organization and outside of the organization. Other people make their shoes, they make their clothing, and they happen to market it, and that is their function. They've outsourced almost everything. Actually, they've gone more, it's called offshoring, when they actually moved it to a different country and they manufactured them over there. Outsourcing solves a lot of problems because they're not employees, because they tend to be contractors when you do that. So pay attention to the classification. It'll go a long ways if you get this right. It'll also go a long ways in the other direction if you get it wrong. Take care.